Here we go. We're going to take a look at an introduction to algebra, and basically that's the idea of being able to represent a lot of different scenarios of unknowns and solve them mathematically. And the first thing we need to dive into is a little bit of the terminology, and we're going to give you the term, the definition, and an example just to help you make sense of it, and then we're going to practice finding them. Now a variable, hopefully you're already familiar with that. It's basically a letter that represents an unknown number. So when you look at the example here, anytime that you see a letter there, it's the same thing as if you saw a question mark. Well, what plus 6? And if it doesn't have to be an A, it could be any letter of the alphabet, but they are lowercase. Okay, so now let's go take a look at what a coefficient is. This one might be new to some of you, but really a lot of you are starting to get used to the idea that when you see a number sitting next to a letter in a math equation or a math problem, it means that the number is multiplying that letter, that unknown number. So here's the variable right there. There's no plus or minus sign in between there, and basically it means that 7 is multiplying the unknown number. So what's the coefficient? In this case, it's the number multiplying the letter. So 7 is our coefficient. Moving on down, the next thing I want to talk to you about are terms. And basically, you would go through and you would say, well, let's count up the terms by seeing what's divided by plus or minus sign. So since I see a plus sign right here, that means that we have a term in front of it. Here's the first term. Everything that's in front of that plus sign. And what's behind it? Everything that's behind the plus sign. So we have two terms. Here's the first term, and here's the second term. Our first term is 5x to the second power, and our second term is 3. So that's what we've got there for our terms. Moving on down, if they're saying it's an equation, basically it means this. If you see a math problem that has an equal sign in it, like this right here, this whole thing is an equation. And you should be familiar with inequality signs. You've worked with those before. So if you see the inequality sign, everything that's involved is a part of an inequality. And I'm sorry, that should have a line drawn through that equal sign there. So basically, if we said 8x is not equal to 27, like this, would be a part of an inequality problem. Just a sign saying they're not equal. Moving on down. The base. Well, you should have worked with exponents a little bit in the past, and basically it's the large number that's right next to the exponent. The 3 is the exponent, the 2 is the base, and we're going to use that as a factor for the exponent. And then what goes along with that is if 2 is the base, then 3 is the exponent. And basically what that does is the exponent tells you how many times the base is going to multiply itself. The base is 2, the exponent is 3, so it means 2 times 2 times 2. There's 3 2's. We use that base to multiply itself over and over again, however many times the exponent tells us. Now, that being said, it's time that we put to use these definitions, these terms, and get you used to finding them in problems. So let's find the variables. Here's 1, 2, and 3. Pause the video, and when you're ready with the answers, hit play. Variables, those are the unknown numbers, so x and y. The 2 is multiplying the x, and the y would then be added to it. So these two are unknown numbers. Number 2, the variables would be m and n. They're just unknown numbers. It literally means 3 times something plus 7 times something equals 8. That's what it's trying to represent there. Now, number 3, there are no variables. There we go. Now, let's go take a look at this. Go find the coefficients. Well, coefficients are numbers that are multiplying a variable. So here's a variable, and that 4 is multiplying it. That exponent is not multiplying the x, so we can't say that's a coefficient. And this 3 is not multiplying it, so the 4 is our coefficient. 5. Well, the 7 and the 8. We just take the numbers that are multiplying the variables. This 9, it's not multiplying a variable, so it's not a coefficient. 6. There's no number multiplying the y there. I mean, we'll discuss a scenario in a bit, but nothing showing in the problem there. And here is the 3 multiplying the m, so that's our only coefficient that we see in the problem for number 6. And now let's take a look at the last one before we move on to the next page. Number 7. That -8 is not multiplying anything. This 3 is multiplying the y. So there we go. How many terms do you see? Now terms, if you recall, they are separated by plus and minus signs. So here's a plus sign, there's a plus sign. So what's left over? Well, here's our first term, here's our second term, here's our third term. So how many terms do you see? I see 3. Let's kind of divide this up here a little bit. So the key is, let's go find all your plus and minus signs. So here's the minus sign. That means that all of this is the first term and all of this is the second term. So I see 2 terms. Come down here, any plus or minus sign you just need to be aware of. So here's our first term and here's our second term. There's no plus or minus sign in here, so this is all one term. This is a term by itself because it's separated by the plus sign. 2 terms. Here I see a plus sign, and a minus sign. So term 1, term 2, term 3, term 4. That's what we're talking about. How many terms are in this expression? 4 terms. And here's one just to challenge you a little bit. How many terms are in this one? Well, go find all your plus and minus signs, and then suddenly it gets very easy, very straightforward. First term, second, third, fourth, fifth. So there are 5 terms there. Now, determine if what's given is an equation or inequality. If you recall, the idea is you find out if it's got an inequality sign or an equal sign. Since it's got an equal, this would be considered an equation. This has an equal sign, so it's an equation. This has an inequality sign, so of course we would call that an inequality. Same thing down here. Inequality, because it has the inequality sign. Equation, because it has an equal sign. And inequality, because it has the inequality sign. Now, determine the base of each one. The base is the large number that's attached to the exponent. So my base for this one is 4. My base here is unknown. X is the base. But it does represent a number, so it's still the base. Same thing here. Whoops, didn't mean to use the highlighter there. Even though it's got a negative exponent, which you don't know how to do right now, we're just asking what the base is, and that would definitely be a y. This would be g. -4. And +7. Now we're going to do the same thing with what is the exponent. Obviously, those are the small numbers that are floating up beside it. Keep in mind, if it does have a negative sign for the exponent, you need to account for that. That'll show up more in 8th grade math, not 7th. But I just want you to be aware of what's coming down the pike. So there are the exponents for each of those. The only other thing that I would like to mention, we need to go back to the table and we need to and that would be the term constant. Okay. And basically it's just a term where the number is by itself. So 7x plus 2. We know that the 7 would be a coefficient because it's multiplying the variable, but this 2 is a term all by itself because again it's divided by this plus sign from the 7x. First term, second term. This is a term with a number all by itself, so we would say, hey, that's the constant. Hopefully this helps you get used to some of these new definitions. We'll be using them in future conversations about equations and expressions.